Okay, so coming back to dropship and special order items. So in case if there is any dropship or special order item, the purchase order gets automatically created in that case. So what should be the PO form that should be used? Whether an email should be automatically sent to the vendor whenever purchase order is created, you can check this checkbox. Whether you want to print the POs for dropship items, you can check this checkbox. Similarly, in case if you want to fax the dropship purchase orders automatically, you can check this checkbox. Generally now no one uses fax, but in case if someone uses, you can check this checkbox so that it will fax automatically. Similarly, limit supplier list on items, whether the supplier list should be limited on the items or not, or it should be unlimited. Similarly, whether we want to include committed quantities. So even if, so for example, I have a purchase or sales order for 10 items or 10 quantity, okay, but I have 5 already in my stock. So whether the uncommitted or the committed quantity, so whenever a purchase order is created, whether it should be created for 5 quantity or it should be created for 10 quantity, can be defined here by this particular preference. Similarly, whether we want to update the dropship order quantities automatically prior to shipment. So whenever a shipment happens for a dropship order, whether that should get updated. Similarly, there are some validations that can be applied here as well for dropship items. Going ahead, related to purchasing. Okay, so on the purchase order, whether you want the expenses to be automatically, or you can say to be allowed to enter. Do you understand what is an expense? Do you understand what is an expense? Okay, so the thing here is, when you purchase something, there might be a case that you don't have the item for purchase. You directly enter the expense account. Okay, so for example, legal fees or any other like something like that. So in that case, whether you want the expenses to be added on the purchase orders. So what do you mean by that? So if I open a particular purchase order form, here apart from items, I'll also have the option to enter the expenses directly instead of the items. Okay. Let that page open. Okay, so by the time it's opening, let's go ahead. Whether assembly items, the assembly items are generally manufactured in my location or in my organization, but there might be a case that you would also like to purchase those assembly items instead of only manufacturing. So in case if you want that, you can check this checkbox, allow purchase of assembly items. What should be the default location on the purchase order? In case if you have selected something here, it will be the default location. Okay, so the purchase order page is open here. So if I scroll down on the line items, here you can see that I have expenses as well as items. Okay, so if I want to purchase items, I can purchase the items or I can enter the items here. In case if I want to directly enter the expense account instead of the item, I can select the account as well. So that would directly hit my that particular account, expense account that I have selected here. So do you get what do you mean by expenses?
Yes, yes.
So if I uncheck that checkbox, I'll not see this particular thing here. I'll only see the items. Okay. Going ahead, so what should be the maximum number of lines to consolidate? So this is even I have not used this. Okay. So in case if we are generating a purchase order from multiple requisitions, So there might be multiple requisitions for a particular item. So what should be the maximum number of lines that should be used for consolidation on the purchase order can be defined here. Similarly, whether we want to allow email when the purchase order or when the suite flow approval routing happens, whether we want to allow or not, or whether we want to warn or whether we don't want to allow, that can be defined here. Similarly, there is a advanced procurement module which requires request for quote, right? So on the request for quote, so what should be the pricing tiers, maximum or default pricing tiers that should be applied? It would be defined here. Accordingly, there would be 3 tiers that would be required for the request for quote. So this is a part of the advanced procurement module. Similarly, receiving, similar to advance or invoice before fulfillment, on the purchase side we can invoice or create a bill even if I have not received the items. In that case, I can create a bill advance of receipt. Similarly, on the fulfillment side, we have overage on the item fulfillment, right? Similarly, in case if we want the overage on the item receipt, that can be defined here. What should be the default receiving exchange rate? Whether that should be the exchange rate that is defined on the item or defined on the purchase order, or it should be the exchange rate that has been defined on the date of the item receipt. Generally, it is taken as the order exchange rate because at that particular rate I have generated the purchase order. In case if I take that to be the exchange rate of the date on which the item receipt is done, then there would be a difference in the purchase order amount and the invoice item receipt amount. Similarly, whether we want to use the same purchase order rate on bills, then we can check this checkbox. Similarly, in case if we want to have the landed cost per line item, then we can check this particular checkbox. Okay, you know the concept of landed cost, right? We discussed that yesterday. Similarly, returns, what should be the status of the return authorization? So whenever we went through the return authorization process from the customer in the order to cash process, whether it should be pending receipt or pending approval, whether we want the return authorization process to go through the approval process, then it can be defined here. Similarly, in case if there is something returned by the customer, whether we want the system to allow to refund even if the return is not done, then we can check this checkbox. Whether we want to restock returned items, then we can check this checkbox so that it will increase my inventory again. Similarly, in case if there is any damaged goods, what should be the write-off account for the returns that are done? Similarly, on the purchase side, if I'm returning something to the vendor, when I create a vendor return authorization, what should be the status? Whether it should be pending fulfillment, pending return or pending approval. Similarly, in case if you want or the system to allow to create a credit memo in advance, even if I have not returned the item to the supplier, I can check this checkbox. Going ahead, transfer orders. If we are transferring something from one location to another, what should be the status? Whether it should be pending approval or whether it should be fulfillment. Similarly, in case whether we want to generate transfer orders in supply planning or not, whether what should be the transfer orders order Incoterms. So these defines who will have the liability when a particular transfer order is done, whether it should be the location which is transferring the items or whether it should be the location which is accepting the items. The liability would be defined here. Similarly, what should be the status of the vendor bills, whether it should be pending approval or approved. Okay, similarly, in case if we are using intercompany transfer orders, what should be the order quantities, or what should be the you can see whether we want to update the intercompany order quantities prior to shipments, that can be defined here. So these are all the preferences that are available for order management. Any questions related to it? That is a part of advanced inventory, advanced procurement. Okay, so what happens is whenever we enter a request for quote, okay, there is an option wherein the vendors can log in and enter their quotes in the system. Okay, so what should be the default number? So until and unless there are three quotes, or you can say that three you can say quotes we have received from the vendor, it will not generate the, or it will not allow us to close that particular request for quote. Okay,
Okay.
so it mentions that this is the minimum or the default number of quotes that I should receive from the vendors. By default is it fetches the last purchase price.
Okay.
So whenever we select that particular item and enter the quantity, it will fetch the last purchase price of that particular item at which it was purchased. It will depend on the vendor. It doesn't depend on the state or the location. There is only one purchase price, and depending on that, it will fetch the last purchase price.
Okay, last purchase price. Okay.
Yes, it's not specific to a particular location.
Okay.